Hello, everyone, and welcome to Skills Sessions. Don't know about you, but I always dance when that intro is playing. A good way to start the call, an energizing way to start the call. So lovely to have you here with us today. Please say hello in the chat and let me know where you're joining from. If you haven't joined us before, I'm on this call from Bristol, so yeah, please drop your notes in the chat and let me know where you're joining from. There's a lot of power and community within this space that we've created, so I would encourage you to use that throughout the session. If you're a long-time attendee, today's speaker might be a little bit familiar to you because she was one of the very first speakers that we had back in 2023. But before I introduce Devon properly, I just want to say welcome and thank you so much for supporting Skills Sessions. You are part of a community of over 2,000 people. And by attending these webinars and sharing them with your colleagues and your friends, you're helping us make inclusive workplaces for everyone. And that is exactly why we run these events. You can always find out about what's coming up on the CareScribe website, but for now, I can tell you that in April, Donna Stevenson will be joining us to talk about managing dyslexia in your team, and that is available to book now via the link that should be being dropped into the chat at any moment. Oh, we've got some lovely messages coming in. Hello, everyone. Hi from Belfast, first time caller. I like it, Liz. Nice. Hi from London. Lots of sunny Londons. Lots of London today. Shropshire. Hi from Beverly. Excellent. Keep those messages coming in. I really like to know sort of who's joining us on the call. So skill sessions, they're hosted by the team at CareScribe, and you may be asking, well, who are CareScribe? So we're an award-winning software company based in Bristol, and we create specialist assistive technology to help people who are neurodivergent or who have disabilities to be more productive and confident at work or in their studies. We have two products, Captioned, which is note-taking and captioning software, which helps people capture and comprehend just the piles of information which gets thrown at them either at work or in education. And providing Captioned in your workplace can help retain talent, boost well-being, and of course, bolster productivity to create truly high-performing teams. And all of that ultimately impacts your bottom line. We also have TalkType, which is highly accurate, lightning-fast dictation software, which works on all platforms, Mac, Windows, Chromebook, and mobile. So if you want to find out more about how either of our products can help improve your organization, or you just want to see the product in action for yourself so that you can use it, please drop a message in the chat and one of our team will reach out to you after the session. So before we start, I'm just going to run through some general housekeeping, which is that tomorrow you'll receive a follow-up email, which will include a recording of today's live webinar. And there will also be a feedback survey in the chat and when you exit the webinar as well. And this is where you can let us know how you found the session. As I said at the start, and some of you are already doing a fantastic job of it, please do join in with the chat and talk to your peers on the call. We see lots of great sort of stories and experiences being shared in the chat, and that just adds another level to the conversation that we're having today. All of that in mind, though, I do understand that the chat can be a bit distracting for some people. So if you need to, you can turn off chat previews and you can mute your notifications as well. If you have any questions for the speaker, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to point down here. I think it says Q&A, the big question mark on it, so you should be able to find it. I'm going to encourage you to use that function for your questions rather than the chat, because sometimes the chat gets quite busy and it means that your very important question won't get lost. And if you use the Q&A function, you can also upvote other people's questions so that we know which ones to tackle as a priority during this time together. And the question that we get asked the most is that, yes, this webinar is being recorded. So you'll be sent the recording and a full transcript generated by Captioned in your inbox tomorrow. So with all of the housekeeping out of the way, I want to introduce you to Devon Lowndes as she joins me on screen. So Devon, please do join me on camera. and I'll give a brief overview as to your background. Hi, Devon. So Devon is a neurodiversity and ED&I consultant. She's also the co-founder of Self Agency, which gives organisations the tools to build an inclusive culture where everyone feels supported, which, what an excellent business to have. Devon herself has ADHD and dyslexia, so she knows what it's like to feel different. And I have no doubt that we'll find out a bit more about Devon's journey shortly. So I'm going to hand over to you, Devon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll leave you to it, and I'll be back at the end with everybody's questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire. And I was totally having a little boogie along to the intro music there. So I hope other people at home are feeling that same vibe. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so you guys can see my slides. So bear with me just one moment. Here we are. So reasonable adjustments, transitioning teams from home to office happily. It's a topic we have all come across recently. I have personally found that most of the organisations that I work with, whether they're global, multinational organisations, or some of those closest to our heart here in Bristol, for those of you that might be local, are all dealing with this return to office in some way or another. And reasonable adjustments is a big part of that. So without further ado, I'd like to ask you if you can drop in the chat, how do you prefer to work? Do you prefer to work from home, from the office, or do you prefer a hybrid model? And if you could just drop a sentence explaining why that is, that would be great. Oh, we've already got Margaret here from home. Yeah, I'm joining this webinar from home today. I'm more of a hybrid gal myself, but some things like this I find easier from home. Hybrid for me, this is so I can adjust to my environment where everyone can work the best. Hybrid, best of both worlds, absolutely. Hybrid, home, we're having lots of home in silence from Paula. Yeah, a bit of quiet time is good for everyone, isn't it? Particularly for me when I'm doing finances, I need that complete concentration bubble. Working from home today, hybrid model, currently in the office, like a mix to be able to see people, but also from home, I can get some decent heads down and work done. Absolutely. There are those collaborative bits where sometimes we want to be around other people and that's really collaborative, but other times we just want to get on and heads down. Heads down, that's a good way to put it. And Paul, at home, the ability to control my sensory environment is really valuable and allows me to concentrate better. Absolutely. Sensory environment. Wow, that's a term I'm definitely going to be stealing, if that's all right with you, Paula. Sensory environment, so much easier to control from our homes, isn't it? Hopefully today we should cover some of the things that could maybe help you to support your employees to control their sensory environment while they're in the office. Who knows? We'll go through this together and we'll see. Thank you so much for joining in there. Oh yeah, Liz, the commute. That's a real thing, isn't it? It can really set us up in the wrong way for our day if we're not ready for that stressful commute, depending on where we live. There's Michelle as well, spending years on motorways. I can really relate to that. So thank you so much for giving your answers there, guys. I'm going to be going through 3 things that you can do to meaningfully improve the working lives of people returning to the office today. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is encouraging open conversations. And I think that this is relevant not just for return to the office, but maybe for all of the time, right? Encouraging those open conversations between our employees and our line managers in particular can be really tough, but we're going to talk about a few ways that we can do that. Through the model of psychological safety, which is something I'm sure lots of you have come across in your working lives. So psychological safety, what is it? It's a concept by Amy Edmondson, and it's how do you feel safe within your team? On this graphic, it says a new team, and that's just because this resource from Amy was focusing on that. But sometimes I think when we're returning to the office, things can feel new. In fact, a lot of the people that I work with, perhaps they joined the organisation during the pandemic and they've never been in the office, so it can feel completely new. So let's talk about the 4 levels of psychological safety. The first is to feel included, to feel you are welcome, and to feel like the office is somewhere that's set up for you to thrive. If the office isn't feeling like a place that you can thrive, the office is feeling like the wrong sensory environment for you, maybe we're open plan, maybe there's lots of people wanting conversations and wanting that social element, and that might be difficult or anxiety provoking for certain employees, or, you know, maybe certain people with neurodiversity, or like we said, just after the pandemic, returning to those busy social situations can be anxiety provoking for all of us, can't it? So if we can set up that situation to feel like either we can be there and we can be ourselves and we can get what we need and it's the right environment for us, or that if we request the things that we need to make it the right environment for us, that's not going to fall on deaf ears and it's going to be taken seriously and enacted on, then we can open up that sense of belonging, open up that sense of feeling welcomed in the workplace. Learning is our second level. So that's that feeling that I can ask questions without worrying that that might make me seem like, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention, I don't have the experience. There are lots of things that can hold us back from being able to ask those questions at work. One of the greatest ways that I recommend all over the place for encouraging this is for modeling from our managers, from our senior leadership levels, of this question asking, right? If we can put up our hands as a manager and say, oh, can you just remind me what this means? What's this term? Or what were we doing here? Then you can really model that that's a safe and okay thing for everybody to do. And that can go along with not just the subject of the work matter, but returning to the office in general. So there's that learning, isn't there? What is the GDPR rules when I'm working from home? What are the GDPR rules when I'm working from the office? Are there differences there? We can start to model asking those questions to make other people feel more safe. And you might actually be asking a question you know that lots of other people will have on their minds. Contributing, I can add value. So for a lot of employees that prefer to work from home or in a hybrid way, sometimes they are made to feel that they can't contribute and add value in the same way. There's a lot of messaging out there at the moment that people might be less productive from home, people might do their job less efficiently from home, and dare I say that people from home might be trying to be a bit lazy. This isn't true. And I'm sure as we've had loads of answers in the chat that we like home working and hybrid working, you guys know that too. And you probably come across that falsehood that working from home is actually people trying to get away with not working, when we can see actually for someone to feel psychologically safe and able to have those open conversations with you, they need to be able to feel like they can add value. And if their preferred ways of working is a hybrid way, or is working in the office, but with some of those adaptations, some of those reasonable adjustments, accommodations, whatever it is that you're calling them in your workplace, that still adds value and they don't become a nuisance or a burden or asking for special treatment. So that we're keeping ourselves really open to making sure people feel that they can add value. And the final one here is challenging, that I can challenge the people around me. Hey, can I just ask, why is it that you need me to come and work in the office? Why is it that Wednesdays are the day when I've got to be in? We want people to be able to challenge this so that we can give them the well thought through reasoning behind the reason we're asking them to return. In order for them to feel safe, they need to be able to get all of that information without, again, feeling like they are asking difficult questions or making a nuisance of themselves. This is feedback we get a lot from disabled and neurodivergent employees in particular, but really across the board. They don't want to ask for more accommodations. They don't want to challenge the return to work situation they found themselves in because they're worried about finding themselves a nuisance. And I'm sure we all know that we want people to come with those questions, especially if we are encouraging open conversations. So that's the first thing that I really recommend if we're talking about the return to office and we're talking about reasonable adjustments. Encourage those open conversations through encouraging psychological safety. So the second is personalised accommodation. So this might mean that we find a way to personalize a return to office. Is that a phased return to office? This could be an individual matter, right? This could be not a company-wide request to return to office, but it could be that somebody's had a long-term sickness absence and they're returning. And if we think of it in that way, we do have a long-term established route, normally through our HR policies, that we can have a phased return, that we can try out different days, that we can slowly build up those hours that we are increasing in the office. Other personalised accommodations can be things like quiet working spaces. This can be things like headphones, noise cancelling headphones. We talked a lot about silence in the chat. Somebody said they like the silence, and I can't find a better silence than my headphones. I like to have what I call my concentrating music on. It's actually called that in the playlist. Please feel free to laugh at me in the chat. But I put on my concentrating music and have those noise cancelling headphones to ensure that I'm really not distracted, because my brain is really good at getting distracted. I'm hoping people can relate, but if not, you know, that's all down to the fact that I have ADHD and dyslexia, and my brain really wants to interact with other people. My brain really wants to see what's going on over there. So for me, having the noise cancelling headphones and having that concentrating music on is maybe the only way that I can get my finance work done. Can just see a couple of things in the chat. Oh, we've got some other, concentrating music is techno music. I love that. I would love to meet this person. I bet they are a lot of fun. I can't say I like techno music even in the fun times, but whatever works for you. Hey, we talked about personalized accommodations. What's your concentrating music? Maybe everyone has something a bit different. What I'd like to talk about, though, as we are here today to talk about reasonable adjustments on the title, I like to call them accommodations. And this is because there's been some pushback from the disabled community, from the neurodivergent community, and from the HR community at large, that reasonable adjustments is quite a confusing term. Reasonable for who? What does reasonable mean? So I like to go for accommodations. And I like to do my accommodations based on the social model and not the medical model. So let me explain what I mean. Oh, I will if I can flick my slides. There we go. So medical model tends to look at the individual as having the problems. Okay, so if I take myself, for example, someone with dyslexia and ADHD, we might say distractible. She needs some blinkers on. We might say that she is really, really chatty and needs to be away from her co-workers so that she's not getting distracted by having conversations. We might say that she's got poor focus. I've got a lack of ability to spell and write correctly. So you can probably understand, and these are all real examples, by the way, of labels that I've received in workplaces, how that slowly started to make me feel like I was a problem. And going back to what we just said about psychological safety, it then made me feel like I wasn't able to add value because these things I needed to fix. I needed to fix about myself, or I needed support to fix myself in order to be a productive member of those teams. And needing to be fixed made me feel like there was something wrong. What's wrong with me became my internal monologue for a long time until I came across the social model. Now, the social model, rather than pointing fingers at the individual and seeing what's broken or what's weak or what's wrong with you, looks at what might be in the environment, in the systems, in the buildings even, that is a barrier for individuals. So rather than saying, oh, Devon, you get a bit distracted, so if you want to use the quiet space in one of the offices, then I can give you access to that. It might be sending around a company-wide communication saying, hey, there's this space available for quiet working. Can you see there how we've changed the environment? We've changed something about the workplace setting that's going to make it more accessible. Maybe not just for me, maybe for other people too. So here are a few examples of what some medical model accommodations might look like as opposed to social model. And remember, the reason that we want to do the social model is because we want to make people feel psychologically safe. We want to make people feel valued and like they're contributing well. And we want to make people feel like they belong and are welcome in the space. So, medical model, we might provide an adapted keyboard for someone with dexterity challenges. And that might be really key and important. I'm not saying that we don't do that. But it might be that also we provide a company policy where we ask everybody at the beginning of their working year or when they onboard, do you need any of this extra desk equipment? Can you see there how we've made it a company thing and not an individual thing? So a social model example of something for somebody maybe with that needs a wheelchair would be installing automatic door openers to improve the accessibility for people in wheelchairs. Again, we've not asked that individual to ring ahead and we'll make sure someone's there to welcome you and get you through the doors. We've actually changed something about the environment to remove that barrier entirely. We could offer flexible working arrangements and accommodate individual needs. So that again could be a company-wide policy, something that we talk about with all of our employees, rather than adjusting work hours for one singular employee who might have something like chronic fatigue syndrome. So again, we're not singling people out to make them feel like maybe something about them is different and needs to be fixed, but maybe that difference in them also could be a great asset, right? That's something that we'll save for another webinar. I won't get into that today, but we can actually make sure that people feel welcomed and belonging and like they can turn up and contribute without having to ask for things. It's often across the board that we find similar accommodations that are needed for a range of different reasons for employees. So I hope that one helps. Okay, so this is my third suggestion for how to do great returns to office. It's regular check-ins. And I'm going to let you in on something here. Regular check-ins is what I would recommend in almost every situation everywhere. Most of the organizations I go to at some point on some teams or on some level have dropped their number of regular check-ins. Their one-to-ones have gone from weekly to bi-weekly to monthly to never, just when we've got to do the yearly review maybe. So regular check-ins help us to avoid, especially as HR and management, getting into unconscious bias, right? We start to make the story up. That's what our brains are so good for. Human brains are made to tell stories. We will fill in the information that we don't have. So let's sure that we have the information through our regular check-ins so that we're not falling into the pattern of unconscious bias. We're not falling into maybe thinking that our employees with ADHD who prefer to work from home sometimes are actually just lazy. I'm sure, that sounds like a strong sentence, but I'm sure actually that plenty of people here today have heard something like that narrative. It could be actually that they work from home because they're trying to be more productive. As lots of you have said in the chat, that's what helps you to be productive. So these regular check-ins are really good unconscious bias busters. And it can help us to get really clear on what people need and what people are actually going through. I'm going to tell you a story. I think I've got time. I'm going to tell you a story. So there was a lady I was brought in to support in an organization, and I have her full permission to tell this story in my trainings. And she was on her final warning, really, before it was looking at termination of her contract. And this is because her working hours varied greatly from day to day. She would often explain that she was sorry that she was late. She would try better. People had put things in place for her, like a 15-minute window between when she could arrive to try and negate the lateness. People had explained to her why it was important for her to be in late. Part of the duties were covering a front of house desk that needed to be open at a particular time. It came to light though just before I joined the team, and this is the reason I was brought in to support, that we'd kind of gotten quite far along the disciplinary process with this individual, where the only regular check-ins had been about this disciplinary matter. She hadn't had any regular check-ins with her line manager for a long time for various reasons. And it turned out that this individual was actually living with their partner who had a terminal illness. And this is the reason that she was late most of the time. And as you can imagine, the empathy on the team for the reason she was late went up tenfold, 100-fold in that moment. And people could really understand that this wasn't about her not caring about her job. This was actually about her caring for her partner who was unwell at home. They then implemented that she would cover the desk on the afternoons, and this is when there was care actually in the home, so that she didn't have to leave her partner when she was the only carer at home. So we don't know what's going on for our people until we sit down and check in with them. And we also don't know what's going on with them until we've built up that rapport and trust for them to share something that big. You can imagine that if you're having a check-in every 6 months or once a quarter, in that 1 hour, you might not feel like, or you might not feel safe enough to open up about something just so big. So regular check-ins to build trust, to build rapport, to build that sense of belonging are so vital. Because that then means we're going back to our first point then about encouraging that open conversations. People then feel safe enough to bring that information in and to fully open up. So here are the 6 components of building a relationship based on trust and belonging, according to Lisa D. Foster, who's a leadership coach and trainer. So empathy, listening, recognition, curiosity, compassion, and gratitude. So I would suggest that these are the 6 things you really want to be training your managers on how to introduce elements of all of these 6 things into their regular check-ins to make sure that they're building that. You can really see how compassion and gratitude would build that psychological safety. The gratitude in particular really adds a sense of what value that employee is bringing. If we can be really grateful for that bit of work they did last week, if we can be grateful that they've opened up to us and helped us to understand what accommodations they might need. Recognition. We can recognize and praise the positives in someone's work, but we can also recognize maybe the difficulties that people have gone through. I recognize that you have been coming back into the office for a couple of weeks now, when we'd had a conversation about that being difficult for you. So I just wanted to send some gratitude your way. See, 2 in 1 there, for doing that. So when we start to build these things in our relationships with our employees, we start to increase the quality of those one-to-one conversations. I'm going to give you one tool in your back pocket that's going to really help you to introduce these into your one-to-ones or to take to line managers in your organizations as a tool for them to help increase their one-to-ones. So we call this unpacking wins. So too often in our whole lives as human beings, we are focusing on the negative. We're focusing on what went wrong, where we stumbled, where we tripped up. And that's because our brains are hardwired to notice and concentrate on that stuff. Because back in the primal years of humanism, is that some words, of humanity, we probably really did need to focus on that time we nearly got eaten by a tiger, right? Because we want to make sure we never get eaten by that tiger again. So we're so hardwired to focus on those difficulties. This task really helps to build a habit and build the strength to focus on some of the positives. And it gives us really good tools to be able to combat some of those barriers and challenges. So I'm going to go through these 3 sections. I'm going to just read from a piece of paper, so please do excuse me. But I filled this in for myself about a win that I had recently. And hopefully this will help you to understand how you can use this tool to overcome some barriers. So I'm going to start with the individual. That's me. So I know that I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD, but at this point, when I sat down to do this task, I was feeling quite calm because I'd had a one-to-one with a colleague where I talked through the task and I was encouraged by them. So I was feeling encouraged and I was feeling psychologically safe. The task itself was to write a report, which normally as a dyslexic person has my heart beating fast. I'm already feeling the emotion rising, and a sense of panic can set in. But I had broken the task down into manageable sections. I was clear about what I had to do and in what order. The time frame was clear that I had to complete the task, and I was well researched and prepared. So that conversation I'd had with the colleague beforehand had helped me to get the task really clear and set out. Then I looked at the environment. I had my noise cancelling headphones in and my concentrating music on, and I was in a communal area, not at home and not in the office. Now, this is important for me as someone with ADHD. If I'm in my home, I'm sure you guys, I love this term. I'm sure you guys have all been there at some point, but I love to do a bit of procrastinating, they call it. So procrastinating by doing the cleaning jobs that I would never ever do otherwise, the skirting boards or like just hoovering under the sofa. And if I'm in the office surrounded by wonderful colleagues, my brain would absolutely much rather be having a chat with them than getting on with writing a report. Because as I've said, as a dyslexic person, there's so much, I'm rubber banded right back to being a young child, being in lots of trouble for not being able to get my F's and G's under the line, or my spellings just on. So that was a really good environment for me. I also have someone on WhatsApp that I could message for support if I needed to. I told them when I would be doing this work. It was the same colleague I'd had the chat with, and they were available at that time. So if I needed to ping over a paragraph and say, hey, does this sound right? Or needed to go, was this number okay before I put it in? I knew they'd be available at that time. So my environment felt supported. I was also warm and I was comfortable. I had a drink. I'd been to the toilet. I know that might sound basic, but again, for any of my fellow neurodivergent people on the call, you'll know when you get sat down to do a task, it could be a long time before you realize why you're so uncomfortable. And it's because you've not been for a wee in a while, right? So I unpacked that win. Can you see how much I've learned about my brain and what it needs to work there, what accommodations I need? And it's only by going back and thinking, why did that bit of work, why did that task go so well? It's because I had my noise cancelling headphones. It's because I was in the right environment. It's because I'd laid out the task in an appropriate way beforehand that we can then go and apply it elsewhere. So a really good example of this, I was supporting somebody who managed someone who went and did off-site visits in their car, and they made lots of appointments with people in the community to go and visit. Now, they were often not turning up for these appointments or being late. And this looked really bad for the company. And they'd kind of focused on, why are you late? Why are you missing these appointments? And they'd hammered that home until this individual felt really rubbish at their job. And guess what? They were missing more appointments. They were being more late for things, right? Can you see how that anxiety increased the problem? So instead, we broke it down. Let's unpack a win. Let's talk about a client that you have a really good relationship with, that you're always on time for. And we realized that these appointments needed to be scheduled in the afternoon for this individual, and they were going to do their desk work in the morning. And once we'd unpacked the win about the client that was going really well, that was really obvious. This was always someone they met with in the afternoon, and it was someone that they were never late for. So we could use unpacking the win, a positive way to have a conversation, not a disciplinary type conversation, not a conversation about failures and missteps, but a conversation about what had gone really well, and then we can replicate that. So I hope that makes lots of sense for you guys. I did see some things just popping up in the chat, if it's going to let me read them. No, it won't let me access them right now, so I'm sure I will catch up in the chat just when I can. So just as a recap for you guys then, we want to encourage open conversations with psychological safety. We want to personalize accommodations focused on changing the environment to serve the individual. And we want regular check-ins to build trust and belonging. If these three things are met, we can ensure that people are having a much easier transition to working in the office, and then it's an ongoing process. I really want to impress upon you guys that with the regular check-ins in particular, we can keep checking in on what's going on. We can keep updating these. Is it still the case that afternoons are best for you to go out and do those client visits? Is it still the case that you want to be in a quiet space to do your financial bits? Or actually, do we need to revisit that? We implemented this last week. How's it going? So we're checking in and we're doing that plan, do, review method, right, to keep updating those accommodations. I've managed to get up the chat now, and we were just having some questions around the empathy, and I completely concur with you there, Kate. It can be a really difficult thing to learn empathy. It can be done, believe it or not. There's some really good research on increasing levels of empathy for individuals. In fact, not just individuals. This research started with people who had committed really atrocious crimes, right, that were actually labelled as having traits of psychopaths. They increased this through restorative justice and storybook reading, right? I'm not suggesting now that you sit down in your office and have everyone read a storybook and do some restorative justice. I'm not quite sure what that would look like with your teams anyway, but we can actually start to increase empathy by having the regular check-ins. If we take away the unconscious bias, we're actually doing a great deal to increase empathy already. So there are a lot of people out there, and I've mentioned it before in the task, but there's a lot of negative assumptions that are made about people that might want to work from home, that they are perhaps trying not to work very hard, or they're wanting an easy ride. If we're having regular catch-ups of a good quality, where we've been trained how to have really good catch-ups, we are absolutely going to start to break down some of those unconscious biases, and that increases levels of empathy, because we're actually then learning about that other person's story rather than making assumptions. Can you see that puts us in that other person's shoes, rather than assuming what it's like to be in someone else's shoes? So empathy, and believe people their story, not that people make it up. Thank you, Stephanie. Absolutely. That trust is integral. And we often want our employees to trust us. In fact, asking employees to return to the office is a massive request for trust. I don't know if you guys if that makes a lot of sense, but we're saying change your lifestyle, right? Particularly, again, for those that are just joining the workforce, for people who are perhaps coming into your office for the first time, if they've joined the company while they could work from home and now they're coming into the office for the first time, maybe people who have been on long-term sick. So we're asking them to change their working environment. We're asking them to trust us that if they come into the office, they're still going to be valued. They're still going to be able to be well. That's a big one, right? And that we're still going to value their input, even if that changes as a return to office. So absolutely, that trust that we're requesting deserves a level of trust on the other side, right? If we're saying trust us, make a leap, come into the office, we promise it's going to be lovely, we've got to trust other people when they tell us their stories. And if we can keep having those, encouraging those open conversations, we can keep building on that trust to a point where people, that's their first port of call. That's where they'll turn to, which is what we want them to do, right? Before it gets to the point of disciplinaries, before it gets to long-term sick absence caused by stress. So yeah, absolutely. Believe people. That might be one of the most important things said yet today, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Believe people when they tell you what they tell you. Okay, fantastic. So I've left you with those three. We finished a bit early, but that might give us a bit more time for some Q&A, and there's been lots of interesting things in the chat, so I'd love to see more of what's there. Is that all right? You there, Claire? There you are, Claire. Amazing. I'll stop sharing here, and we can get to some of those questions.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Devon. I loved the example that you gave, or the tool that you shared, like that unpacking the win and sort of putting that into practice as well. I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's so valuable when we have these sessions to arm people with like actionable, practical things that they can take away and implement. So
Oh,
thank you.
and I think everyone should be unpacking wins for themselves. Like if you
Yeah.
do any kind of journaling or review practice, you take your unpack a win to your own one-to-one and do it there.
Nice, I love it. I love it. So yeah, we've had lots of great conversation in the chat, actually, people like sharing their experiences. So I just wanted to thank everyone on the call for sort of joining in with that and acting in that way. We do have a Q&A section right at the bottom of the screen. So this is your opportunity, everyone on the call, to put your questions direct to an expert, Devon here. I have a couple of questions for you, Devon, before we dig into the Q&A. Also, I was going to ask you, I saw that comment about empathy, and I was going to ask you about whether you shared that same view. So you've already answered one of my questions. Thank you. It's interesting, you know, you talked a lot about trust, and I'm totally with you on that, sort of leading with trust and openness. But I'm just curious, I'm thinking about these big organizations. You know, you'll have layers of middle management, then you'll have senior leadership team, then you'll have the board. And I'm just thinking, how might a manager who is like you know, someone who is a champion of neurodiversity, how might they get buy-in from the board or for senior leaders on some of this stuff? You know, you talked again about trust, but about almost like people need to prove that they're being productive, and you know that trust isn't assumed. So as a manager, how would you get buy-in from the board or senior leaders to help you transition people into the office in a way that accommodates their sort of personal situations?
Absolutely. I think I think every generation, every new iteration of what we call today EDI, well, even that's changing, right? Even we start to pick apart those words, and it comes down to language. These theories have been known and used to make real hard-nosed business sense since the beginning of businesses. So if you can get the right language that speaks to your board, if you can talk about employee engagement and productivity, and if you can talk about outcomes, right? If you can set some KPIs around well-being, around engagement, then they're really going to get this. This is about engagement. At the end of the day, it's cheaper, and we all know this, and we'll sing it till the cows come home. It is cheaper for your business to keep an employee than it is to hire a new one. So you can make some really, in fact, it's all really hard-nosed business sense. I think that most people that find themselves in my position doing this for work, we are the big gooey heart people. That might be a strange term for us. I'll have to find a better one. But you know, we might be doing it because we feel like it's the right thing to do, that we make working lives meaningfully better. And that can all sound, let's be honest, a bit fluffy to people who are really thinking about numbers. They're looking at the bottom line every day. So you can find that language. Actually, I'd really like to support my neurodivergent employees to be more engaged and more productive at work. That's why I'd like to do this. And that case is so true and real, alongside the belonging, the trust, the empathy, those softer terms. Yeah.
For sure. What a great answer. I agree with you on that as well. Like ultimately, and we've spoken about this on previous skill sessions, but it's about talking the language, exactly right, talking the language of the board, and again, bringing it back to bottom line. So employee engagement ultimately means higher performing teams, more productivity, which equals more revenue. So it's just translating that for people, isn't it? Right, we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. Got a question from May, who has asked, what about documentation? They said, we've had problems with a new line manager. Oh, this is a good one. So we've had problems with a new line manager not respecting previous accommodations.
Okay. Yeah, this is a really good one, isn't it? And I think this really links back to what we were just saying. How do we get the buy-in of the higher ups? Because let's face it, if this new line manager was told by the higher ups, these are what you have to stick to. These accommodations are company policy. They help our employee to be the most engaged and productive they can be, then they'd be sticking. I'd also say if these accommodations have been provided around a protected characteristic, which they mostly are, you might want to take this line manager to one side, give them a regular check-in, and explore why they think that this is difficult. There's bound to be some personal belief this line manager is holding about what these accommodations mean, and not upholding them because they think that this makes the person less productive, less engaged, less of a valuable member of the team. So if you can explain to them about how engagement works, about how if they feel valued, that sometimes doesn't work either though, right? Quite often our line managers can feel that they need to have a sense of authority in the team, and they don't want to do something that was previously set out by a different manager. They want to forge their own path. They want to lead in their way. And it might be the case that you have to get a bit stronger and you have to say, hey, these are protected characteristics. You're opening us up to risk of tribunal if you continue in this, to not uphold these accommodations that have been set out. One thing that I see is often not provided for line managers is any management training. You'd be surprised how many managers out there, and I'm sure there are some people in organizations on the call today that know that their managers don't get any training in management. And I think this is a critical misstep. If we are training our managers on what the company policy is around these kinds of things, then we can avoid these kind of difficulties. Because again, what's going to happen is this employee is probably going to have to leave to find somewhere where they'll have the accommodations met. I would say in the meantime as well, please make sure you're reaching out to that employee, providing them with the support that you're able to, whether that's just verbal or a check-in with yourself on an HR team. I think that can be really helpful in kind of maintaining their trust in the organization, even if their trust in the line manager might be a bit precarious right now.
Brilliant advice. Thank you, Devon. Another question which has come in from an anonymous attendee. They've said, understanding you can never presume someone's circumstances, how would you advise starting the conversation if you believe someone may be experiencing certain barriers or neurodivergence if they haven't disclosed?
Yeah, this is one of the questions that I get asked the most often. And it's a really tricky one to navigate, isn't it? When you as a manager or as HR can see where you could maybe support someone, but they're not disclosing to you. First of all, please remember that we have to protect ourselves with our boundaries, right? You're not a doctor, you're not a therapist, you can't cross those lines. What we can talk about though is the barriers, is the behaviors. So we can say things like, I've noticed you might find it a bit difficult to struggle when you're doing this kind of report. We can't say, have you got ADHD because you don't focus when you're doing this, right? You can see
it's a different approach.
Exactly. And just like we have done for many years, we can really talk about behaviors at work. We want to talk about those behaviors, and we can still provide the accommodation just when it's the behavior. The beauty of the employment law in the UK is that you do not have to prove yourself with a diagnosis in order to receive the accommodations. And as an organization in particular, you can go above and beyond on that remit, right? You can offer accommodations company-wide. You can say, hey team, not directed at anyone in particular, but would anyone want to sign up for this noise cancelling headphone scheme that we've got going on? Did you all know about the quiet space that there is for working over there? And then in those regular catch-ups, you open up the conversation, and it might take a while. I've noticed you're struggling to focus on this kind of report. I've noticed that you're talking a lot in meetings, but then we're not seeing a lot of follow-up. I have to put my hand up there. I'm guilty of that one. And then we can start to work on those traits and behaviors. When we start to talk about, we get medical model, right? Like we were talking about before, if we start to think that you've got this, you've got that, you're not doing this very well, we can start to talk about what barriers lie within the person as opposed to the environment. So what is it about report writing that you find difficult? Social model. Why can't you focus when you're doing this? Medical model. So ask about the task, ask about the barriers, maybe then you can bring in the behaviors as well, but try and steer clear of the assumptions, right? It's so easy. And I am probably one of the most guilty people for this in my friendship group in particular. I look around and I'm like, you're all like me. I bet you're all ADHD too. But I have to stop myself and think that's really inappropriate. You wouldn't turn around to anyone else and go, I think you've got dandruff, would you? Right? Because it's because it's not appropriate, and we know that it might not be taken very well. So stick with those behaviors, stick with the barriers, and try and steer away from the medical things. And you can provide the accommodations anyway. Access to work, the government scheme would provide the accommodations anyway. So can you.
Brilliant examples there, Devon. And yeah, just to that point you spoke about, rather than saying to the individual, do you think you might need this, just having it available for people. So that's the view that we take at CareScribe. Our two products, Captioned and TalkType, you know, we sell those into organizations so that they can have a set of licenses, so that when they onboard people, you know, it's just there and people, you know, can request. Also, access to work, our products are available through that as well. So I think your point really resonated there. And when you joined us on the very first skill sessions you had, I can't remember the phrase that you used, but it was about creating that culture where it just exists rather than singling people out. And the phrase you've used escapes my mind. Maybe it'll occur
The only
to me.
one that's coming to my mind is like the site-wide licenses.
Yes. Yeah.
The site-wide license, so that you've got a certain amount of licenses that cover all the employees, and you can have it or not. And you best believe you're going to look around, and people that are nowhere near being dyslexic are using the screen cover, because guess what? They're sat behind a window. So do you know, these things work for everybody. And in fact, especially with well, with all people that sorry, that's the wrong word, that have an impairment or perhaps neurodivergent, they are going to be your best tests of your environment. If something's difficult for them, other people are going to be struggling as well, but maybe not quite so painfully.
It benefits everyone ultimately, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We could all use TalkType, right? We could
Yeah.
all have days where that's much easier than trying to take minutes in a meeting.
Yeah, for sure. Right, we have got 3 minutes left. So we've got a question which I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer, Devon. You've got a strict time. So someone has said, short of moving offices, how could you approach certain sensory accommodations that may be more difficult to implement, such as bright office lights or open plan layouts?
The first and most obvious is hybrid options. Can these people work from home? Can they work elsewhere? And that can be tough. I mean, we live in a very open office world nowadays. I've seen companies employing dividers, so that people can feel like they've got a bit more of a private space. We can look at noise cancelling headphones. We can look at screen glare. It's really hard when there are fluorescent lights above you. That's something that I realised I struggled with before I realised I was neurodivergent. I hated fluorescent lighting. So that can be quite difficult, but you can reduce the glare on the screen. The other one is to have specific spaces within the office where the lights are lower, when the noise is quieter, like your quiet carriage on a train kind of thing. Was
Lovely,
that,
thank you.
that
Yeah,
good?
that's perfect. Thank you so much. We've got just enough time for one last quick fire question, which is, if you had to choose one key takeaway that people should leave this session today with, what would it be?
Okay, so I think that it would be encouraging the open conversations with psychological safety. The more you do that, the more you learn. And I defy any senior leadership person to challenge you on learning more is a bad thing. Learning more is always a good thing. Yeah, keep having those open conversations. You never know what learning is going to come from it.
100%. Devon, thank you so much for your time
So
today. There's been so much engagement on the chat, and loads of things that you've said has clearly resonated with the attendees. So thank you so much. And again, for anyone that, you know, really found today's conversation enlightening and educational, we've been hosting skill sessions for about 2 years now. So please do go to CareScribe's website or our YouTube channel, because you can view all sorts of content around the topic of neurodiversity and sort of learn some more things which you can put into place at work. In just a second, one of the team's going to post a link to the feedback survey I mentioned at the start. You can let us know how you found today. We do implement your feedback. You can also request more information about Captioned and TalkType if you would like to learn more. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, please help us spread the word. We'd love it if you could share skill sessions with your LinkedIn network or your peers or your colleagues, because every bit of word of mouth helps, and we're really eager to grow this community and just create a valuable network for people. You know, whether you're neurodivergent yourself or you manage a team of people in an organisation and you want to better understand how to support. So as I mentioned at the start, next month we have Donna joining us from Neurobox, and they're going to talk about how to manage dyslexia in your team. And that's ready for you to register now. You can sign up for those sessions on our website or on LinkedIn. Just search for CareScribe on LinkedIn. And thank you all once again for today. Devon, it's just been wonderful. We're getting lots of comments in the chat again. Brilliant session. Thank you so much. Thank you, Devon. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I'll definitely be here to listen to Donna next month. She's amazing.
Lovely. What a review. There you go. Right, everyone. See you next month and have
Thanks.
a lovely
Bye.
afternoon. Bye. Bye.